Nestled in a quiet corner of town, hidden between a rundown tailor's shop and a bakery that always smelled of fresh bread, was a peculiar salon called Divine Touch Beauty Salon. The name was deceiving because, despite its angelic ring, there was nothing divine about it. The salon was famous for making women breathtakingly beautiful, but there was one strange rule: no mirrors were allowed inside. Nobody questioned this rule, not after seeing the miraculous transformations that took place within those walls. Women walked in with thinning, damaged, or tangled hair and walked out with thick, luxurious locks that seemed to move as though they had a life of their own. The braids were always flawless, the weave sat perfectly, and the natural hair seemed healthier after just one visit. But beneath the beauty and glamour lay a dark secret. The owner, Madame Sola, was not an ordinary hairdresser. She was a woman of extraordinary charm, her deep brown eyes carrying a hypnotic glow, her skin always glistening as if kissed by water. While people admired her skill, they often ignored the unnerving silence in the salon, the way the air felt thick with an unseen presence, the whispering sounds that came from nowhere, and the occasional splash of water, even though there was no visible source. The truth was, Madame Sola was not walking alone. Unseen to human eyes, creatures from the marine world assisted her, weaving spells into the hair of her clients, binding them with invisible chains that linked them to the deep ocean kingdom. Every strand of hair that fell to the ground was collected carefully, never thrown away carelessly. Those who returned frequently found themselves lost in obsessive admiration of their hair, drawn back again and again as if under a spell. One fateful afternoon, everything changed. A young woman named Ada walked into the salon. She was different, confident, curious, and carrying something she should not have. In her handbag, tucked neatly inside, was a small handheld mirror. She had heard whispers of Divine Touch Beauty Salon's mystery and had decided to uncover the truth for herself. As she settled into the styling chair, she observed her surroundings with keen eyes. The walls were painted a deep blue, almost as if reflecting the depth of the sea. There were no mirrors anywhere, not even the tiny decorative ones that most salons had. The other customers sat still, as though in a trance, their eyes half-lidded as Madame Sola and her assistants moved around them with unnatural grace. Madame Sola approached Ada, her long fingers brushing against Ada's scalp as she inspected her hair. "You have beautiful hair," she murmured, her voice like a gentle wave lapping against the shore. "Thank you," Ada replied, forcing a smile. "But I like to see my hair as it's being made. I brought my own mirror." The salon went silent. Madame Sola's hands froze in Ada's hair. The air thickened, and the quiet whispering sound that had always seemed distant suddenly grew louder, more urgent. The other customers, as if awakening from a spell, blinked rapidly, their eyes darting around in confusion. Ada slowly pulled the mirror from her bag. The moment the reflective surface was exposed, an ear-piercing scream filled the salon. Madame Sola staggered back, shielding her face as if she had been struck. The walls of the salon trembled, and the floor beneath them rippled like disturbed water. Then, from nowhere, the mirrors hidden within the walls and floor, invisible all this time, shattered. And that was when all hell broke loose. The moment Ada's mirror was exposed, the entire salon seemed to come alive. The walls groaned as if in pain, the floorboards creaked and swayed like waves on a stormy night, and an unholy wail echoed from the shadows. The unseen presence that had always lurked in the salon was now fully awake. Madame Sola let out a shriek, her once smooth skin turning pale and translucent like the belly of a fish. Her deep brown eyes swirled with shades of blue and green, unnatural and hypnotic. The carefully placed glamour that had made her appear human was cracking like broken glass. The other customers scrambled to their feet, panic and confusion taking over. Some clutched their heads, their fingers gripping their hair as if suddenly realizing something was terribly wrong. Others backed away toward the door, only to find it locked, the knob ice cold and immovable. Ada, despite the chaos around her, held the mirror firm. Her heart pounded, but she refused to look away from Madame Sola. "What have you done?" Madame Sola hissed, her voice no longer soft and inviting. It was layered, as though more than one being was speaking through her. Ada didn't answer. She just watched. Because something was happening, something she had not expected. From the cracked walls and broken floor, shadows slithered forward. But these were not ordinary shadows. They moved like liquid, shimmering and shifting, taking on strange, inhuman forms. It was a woman, but not entirely human. Her skin glistened like wet scales, shifting between shades of deep blue and emerald green. Her eyes were unnaturally large, glowing like lanterns from the ocean's depths. Long, webbed fingers curled against the salon walls, leaving behind damp, dark stains as she pulled herself forward. Ada's breath itched in her throat. She had expected something strange, something unnatural, but this. More figures slithered into sight, their forms shifting between water and flesh, as though they couldn't decide which world they truly belonged to. They whispered in a language Ada could not understand, their voices like the crashing of distant waves. The customer screamed. One woman, who had just gotten her hair done, clutched her head and fell to the ground, writhing as if something invisible was tightening around her scalp. Another staggered backward, her face contorted in horror. The air inside Divine Touch Beauty Parlor grew thick, almost suffocating. Ada's grip tightened around the mirror as she watched the figures take full form. The creatures were neither fully human nor fully water, their translucent bodies shifting and pulsing like living currents. Their long fingers, webbed and clawed, twitched as they moved closer to Madame Sola. She, too, was changing. The beautiful, radiant woman was no longer there. In her place stood something far more terrifying, a being whose skin shimmered like a fish caught in moonlight, whose hair flowed unnaturally as if underwater, even in the still air of the salon. Her once seductive voice had become layered and echoing, each syllable rippling through the room like a wave crashing against jagged rocks. The customers were no longer simply afraid. They were suffering. One woman shrieked as her freshly braided hair twisted and coiled on its own, moving like snakes against her scalp. Another clutched her head, her nails digging into her temples as if trying to tear something loose. Their reflections, now visible in the shattered glass on the floor, revealed something horrifying. Each of them had strands of misty, ghost-like tendrils wrapped around their heads, as though invisible hands had been weaving unseen spells into their hair all along. Ada took a step back. She had come to expose the truth, but now she feared she had walked into something far worse than she had imagined. Madame Sola turned her gaze toward Ada, and in an instant, the air around her shifted. A powerful force slammed into Ada's chest, knocking the mirror from her grasp. It clattered to the floor but did not break. "You should not have come here," Madame Sola whispered, her voice like the distant crash of ocean waves. She lifted a hand, her webbed fingers stretching unnaturally long, and the broken pieces of glass on the floor trembled, as though responding to her command. Ada scrambled backward, but she knew she could not escape. Not yet. The creatures moved closer, their eerie, waterlogged eyes fixated on her. The whispers grew louder, the sound swelling like a rising tide. Then, without warning, the walls of the salon began to bleed water. It trickled down from the ceiling, pooled in the corners, and crept toward the center like an incoming tide. But this was no ordinary water, it was dark, swirling with shadows that had no place in the natural world. Ada's heart pounded. She had to act fast. Summoning every ounce of courage, she lunged forward, grabbing the mirror once more. But this time, she did something unexpected. She turned it toward Madame Sola. The effect was immediate. A scream, raw and unearthly, erupted from Madame Sola's throat. Her reflection in the mirror showed her true form, a monstrous being with hollow, sunken eyes and skin that was no longer smooth but covered in faint, shifting scales. The spell that kept her disguised was breaking. The marine creatures recoiled, their forms flickering like dying candle flames. Ada gritted her teeth. She had uncovered the truth, but now she had to figure out how to survive it. And as the salon continued to flood with unnatural water, she realized one chilling fact. She wasn't just fighting to escape. She was fighting not to be dragged into the depths. The salon was no longer just a room, it had transformed into something else, something ancient and cursed. The water rising from the floor was thick and dark, swirling with unnatural life. It lapped against Ada's ankles, cold and heavy, pulling at her like unseen hands trying to drag her down. Madame Sola's scream still echoed, but now it was mixed with a deep, guttural sound, a chant, low and haunting, spoken in a language that did not belong to the human world. The creatures in the shadows stirred restlessly, their webbed hands clawing at the air, their glowing eyes fixated on Ada with hunger. But Ada didn't falter. She gripped the mirror tighter, holding it up like a weapon. The moment Madame Sola's reflection appeared again, another unearthly shriek filled the air. The Marine Queen stumbled back, her hands flying to her face as if she could somehow stop the transformation happening before everyone's eyes. "No!" Madame Sola rasped. Her voice was losing its layered, hypnotic quality. It was raw now, desperate. "You don't know what you're doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," Ada shot back, stepping forward despite the water rising to her knees. "You've been hiding behind your magic for too long. But now, everyone can see what you really are." Around her, the customers who had been caught in the spell were beginning to stir. Some clutched their heads, blinking rapidly as if waking from a long, deep trance. One woman gasped, staring at the strands of hair in her hands, hair that, in the mirror's reflection, looked more like riding seaweed than human locks. Madame Sola let out a furious hiss and flung out her hand. The water surged violently, twisting into a wave that crashed toward Ada like a living beast. She barely had time to react before the force knocked her off her feet. The mirror slipped from her grasp, skidding across the flooded floor. Ada choked as the cold water closed over her head. It wasn't normal water, it was thick, like liquid shadow, wrapping around her body and pulling her downward. Panic flared in her chest as she thrashed, trying to fight the invisible hands dragging her into the depths. And then she saw them. Beneath the water's surface, figures moved, silent, watching. They were not fully formed, their bodies flickering like mirages, but their eyes were unmistakable. Hollow. Endless. The trapped souls of those who had come before her. Ada's lungs burned. She needed air. She needed out. Through the distorted view of the water, she saw Madame Sola wading toward the fallen mirror. A slow, triumphant smile crept onto the Marine Queen's face. "No!" Ada screamed, bubbles bursting from her lips. She kicked out with all her strength, her foot connecting with something solid beneath the water. The force sent her upward, just enough for her hand to break the surface. She reached. Clawed. Her fingers closed around something cold and smooth. The mirror. Summoning every ounce of strength left in her, Ada wrenched the mirror upward, angling it toward Madame Sola once more. The reaction was immediate. A force unlike anything before erupted from the mirror, a brilliant, blinding light that cut through the darkness. The marine creatures howled, their forms flickering like shadows caught in a storm. The water recoiled, thrashing violently as if in agony. And Madame Sola. She let out a final, a splitting scream as her body began to dissolve. Her beautiful face cracked and peeled away, revealing something monstrous beneath. Her arms stretched, twisting unnaturally as the scales covering her skin darkened, melted, and dispersed into the air like mist. The salon trembled. The walls, once solid, rippled as though they were no longer part of this world. And then, the flood began to reverse. The dark water, the grasping hands, the whispering figures, all of it was sucked back into the shattered mirror in Ada's hands. The force was overwhelming, almost knocking her off balance. Madame Sola's twisted form was the last to go, her hollow eyes locking onto Ada's with one final, furious glare. Before she was pulled into the glass. And then, silence. The salon was dry. The walls were whole again. The customers who had been trapped fell to the floor, gasping as if they had been holding their breath for hours. Some clutched their hair, horrified at what had been done to them. Others simply wept. Ada stood in the center of it all, trembling, still holding the mirror. Inside its surface, something moved. A dark shadow, swirling restlessly. Madame Sola was gone. Or was she? The mirror in Ada's hands was no longer just a reflection, it was a prison. Shadows swirled inside, shifting like stormy waves, and deep within its depths, a pair of glowing, furious eyes stared back at her. Madame Sola was trapped. But Ada had no time to celebrate. A low, guttural sound rumbled through the salon like distant thunder. The walls trembled again, but this time, it wasn't the marine spirits trying to break free, it was something worse. The mirror began to vibrate violently in her grasp. It grew hot, almost burning her fingers, and the swirling shadows inside churned faster. Then, the whispering returned. But this time, it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the mirror. "You think you've won," a voice hissed, distorted and layered with tones too deep and ancient for a human throat. "You have only awakened something far greater than you can comprehend." Ada's breath hitched. The customers who had been freed from the trance huddled together, still shaken. Some had already bolted for the door, their fear overriding their curiosity. But one woman, a frail-looking lady with streaks of silver in her hair, stayed behind. She had been among the first to get her hair done that day, her braids woven so tightly that they had seemed to pulse with unnatural life before the spell broke. Now, she stepped forward cautiously. Her voice was barely above a whisper. What do we do with it?" she asked, nodding at the mirror. Ada didn't know. But before she could answer, the salon door slammed shut on its own. A gust of freezing air blasted through the room, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of salt and decay. The lights flickered, and the ground beneath them felt wrong. As if it was no longer solid wood but shifting, moving water. The silver-haired woman gasped. "She's still here." Ada's grip on the mirror tightened. "No. She's inside this thing. She can't." A violent bang cut her off. The mirror jerked in her hands, almost ripping itself free. The shadows inside churned aggressively, and then cracks appeared on the surface. Ada's stomach dropped. Madame Sola was trying to break free. A sharp, icy pain shot up Ada's arms as the mirror paused again. It felt as though something was clawing at her from the inside, desperate to drag her into the dark abyss where Madame Sola now resided. The salon floor shifted. No, it was sinking. The wooden panels turned translucent, rippling like the surface of a restless ocean. It was as if the entire salon was being swallowed into another realm, dragged back into the marine kingdom where Madame Sola's power had originated. Ada's heart pounded. She knew if she hesitated even a second longer, it would be too late. "We need to get out," one of the remaining customers screamed. But there was no way out. The door was sealed shut. The windows, once clear, now reflected nothing but endless, swirling water. The salon was no longer in the town. It was no longer on land. It was sinking into the ocean realm. Ada had one chance. One final gamble. She turned the mirror downward and slammed it against the floor with all her strength. A deafening crack split the air as the mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces. The moment it did, the world broke apart. A force like an undersea explosion sent everyone flying. Ada felt herself being lifted, hurled into the air as the salon seemed to implode. A blinding blue light filled the room, the sound of rushing waves roaring in her ears. And then, darkness. Silence. Cold. Ada's eyes fluttered open. She was lying on solid ground. But it wasn't the salon floor. It was rough, damp earth. The scent of salt and wet wood filled her nostrils. She pushed herself up slowly, her limbs aching. She was outside. The salon, Divine Touch Beauty Salon, was gone. Completely. The other women lay sprawled around her, dazed but alive. Some groaned, pushing themselves upright, their eyes wide with disbelief. It took a moment for Ada to realize where they were. The street where the salon had once stood was empty. There was no sign that the building had ever existed. No broken walls, no debris, just a dark, damp patch of earth where it had once been, as if something massive had been ripped from reality. The silver-haired woman clutched Ada's arm, her fingers trembling. What happened?" she whispered. Ada swallowed hard, staring at the spot where Madame Solar's cursed salon had stood. "I think," she whispered back, her voice unsteady. "I think it's been taken back. Back to where it truly belonged." But deep down, Ada knew this wasn't over. Because somewhere, in the depths of the ocean, beyond the reach of the living world, Madame Solar was still waiting. And she was angry.
Thanks for watching. Watch out for episode 2. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel.